Welcome to part 2 of this R150F Manual Transmission rebuild. In this part, we're going to show you how to put everything back together and complete the job. Nick is going to take his time and show you the proper steps and the proper orientation of how everything goes back together properly. We know after we get done with the video, you'll feel confident that you can rebuild one of these, provided you get all the necessary tools to pull it off. Before we get going on the assembly of this transmission, Nick is gonna show you some parts that he's pulled out of other transmissions that were bad, and he's gonna show you what to look for so you'll know when you're doing your inspection, you'll know if a part is worn and should be replaced or it's good to go. So without further ado, let's get going.
All right, here's some parts out of other transmissions. Nothing out of the one we're doing now, just some stuff that I saved so I can show you guys some failures. We'll just start with these input shafts. That's really the most common failure, is something to do with the input shaft. This one right here, you can see this discoloration right here. You see that blue? You just tell it was really hot. Probably could use that. I wouldn't use it, but it probably would run. That's not terrible, but it didn't get put back in. Here's another input shaft that had a bearing. The input bearing blew up. Another really common failure in these transmissions. This one here blew up so bad that you can see where the outer race and the balls like actually came down and wore into the, if you see the difference in the shafts. I wouldn't use that.
Okay, so yeah, you can see all the damage of that surface.
This one here, this is from a R150 3.4. This is a really common thing, and the reason this shaft didn't go back into play is because of this worn tip here, probably from a cheap or bad pilot bearing. That's pretty critical for that. You can see the difference with that shaft. There should be no wear. Well, this is one that got really hot. The bearing didn't fail, so that's not what led to this. I don't remember which trans this came out of, but you could tell the gears just totally roached. And it got so hot that this forcing cone just fell off. That shouldn't happen. That's a really tight press fit right there.
And so you could just tell by the color of the gear that it's black, that it got really hot.
Well, you want to zoom in on that and really look at the finish on that gear.
Yeah, it's like almost like it was in a fire or something.
Yeah, it pretty much was. It was in a transmission fire.
Okay.
That's input shaft stuff. Next, we'll go to counter shaft. So same kind of deal. This gear, if you zoom in on it, I can just tell from this distance it's really dark in color. But just because it's dark doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but it means you need to look real close at that finish. And when you zoom in on that, you'll see that the face of those gear teeth is not nice. This is a gear out of a W56, and a bearing rides in here, and I really don't like the surface inside of there. That got pretty hot. That should be a nice shiny chrome surface. Like here's another gear, you can kind of see what that surface ought to look like. You can see it out here on the thrust surface as well. See how that's nice and shiny, and this is not. That probably could be cleaned up on the lathe if I really needed to, but I also don't like the finish on that gear. The gear just got hot. If you had to run that, I'm sure you could, but I wouldn't run it. Here's another failure. This is a hub. I don't know what broke this, but I see this happen a lot when guys are rebuilding these transmissions. You're usually using a puller like this. There's 3 of these synchro key notches, and it's really important when you pull that, your puller fingers need to be in the middle of this, not over here by the edge.
Because that's where it's weakest, right?
Yeah. So this didn't happen from somebody pulling it. I found this inside of a transmission like that, but I've done that before, not paying attention. You got a lot going on, setting the puller up and with your impact and everything, and you just don't realize that one of the fingers is right on the edge and it'll take a chunk. That's fairly brittle metal. You could see a little dent in that surface right there as well. Something happened in here. One of the last things is a fork. This is a pretty common failure as well. This side of the fork is not bad. You can see that there's just one machined groove right there. If you flip it over, you can see where the collar just ate into the fork. You see on the good fork, you can just see that nice machined one time and it doesn't come back into here. And if you look at this, that collar actually ate all the way into the fork. And you can see how that notch that got worn into the fork. And you can test the forks. You can take the fork and put it into the collar And there's always a little tiny bit of play, but you could see there's very little side to side movement right there. That's good. Okay, here we have the main shaft set up in a lathe just to check the shaft for straightness. Pretty good. Now we'll polish the bearing surfaces. Now we have the counter shaft in the lathe between centers, and we're gonna check to see if there's any bend in the counter shaft. This shaft's got 5/1000ths bend in it. We're gonna replace that shaft. Now we're gonna check the input shaft for straightness. About 3 to 4. We'll probably replace that shaft as well.
So those are some examples of damage you'll see when you're inspecting your parts. Now we're gonna start rebuilding the transmission. Here's all the new parts we are going to install as part of this rebuild. Yota1 offers some different kits. There's the basic kit that just has everything from here over. There's another kit that includes all those parts, including the synchros. And then there's other small parts you might find that need to be replaced while doing the rebuild, like this breather and like this 5th gear oiler. Whatever you need for the rebuild of your transmission, Yota1 will have it and can get it to you. The first thing that Nick is going to do is he's going to install a bearing on this countershaft. As you saw in part 1, Nick is utilizing some custom metal boxes that he made to help him with press work. How you go about doing it yourself is going to be up to you. With press work, it's only limited by your imagination. So there's so many ways to do things, to hold parts, to be able to press parts on. So don't let this throw you. If you don't have something like this, you can build something like this with different diameter holes to use, or you just do it a different way with press plates, with whatever way you could come up with to support the piece that you're working with. So enough said on that. Don't let these custom boxes throw you and make you think you can't do it without them. You can. Nick is going to start off by building up the shafts. It doesn't matter which shaft you start with. You just have to get all 3 shafts built up before you can install the shafts into the center plate.
Okay, so we're gonna put the front counter shaft bearing on. We could do a lot of different things with pressing the bearing on. It's not a real tight fit. I like to use a hammer and just a piece of pipe to drive the bearing down. I don't really want to put any pressure on the tips of any of these gears, just to avoid having to replace the counter shaft. So this bearing comes in the package just like this. It's actually 3 pieces. It comes apart like that. So you're gonna just drop the washer on. There's no real up or down to the washer. It has a little chamfer on both sides of it. So whatever side you pick, you drop that on there. And then the next thing we're gonna do is just set that on like this. And you'll notice that that inner collar starts to catch and this will fall down. So you gotta be careful when you're pounding it down. You see how that bearing will go underneath it. So what I like to do is just grab something, whatever you can come up with, and then I'll hold that bearing up like that. And I'll drive that down until that flat hits the tip of the counter shaft, and then I'll switch to something else here that's larger ID than the counter shaft. And this is, again, like Tim was saying, with the random metal that you imagine, this is just an old oil pump gear out of a transfer case, but it's a perfect size. And that's it. The bearing's installed. We didn't hurt the end of the shaft.
Obviously you have a lot of experience, but you can tell that that bearing was fully seated just by the change in pitch of the sound of you hammering, correct?
Absolutely. And we're going to check it when we grab the snap ring. Before we even try to put the snap ring on, we're going to just put it on from the side and make sure it will go into that groove, and that's how we know that bearing's all the way installed. That washer that I put on first, sometimes that ends up stuck on the shaft. So you want to pay attention and make sure that you actually got that piece off. If you didn't get the piece off, if it's really stuck, it's okay to just leave it on there and throw the new one away and just use the inner and outer race. That's just a spacer. So if it's stuck, not a huge deal. I like to tighten these snap rings up a little bit.
Oh yeah.
They get a little sprung from taking them off.
I've done that before.
Look, that thing fits in there perfect. But there just seems like there's always weird shit. So that's why I keep this here. Makes it a lot easier to look at it and see if there's any little burrs or anything. Now we'll install the snap ring. Just as simple as that. A little bit loose, but it'll grab no problem. If you want, you can tighten it up a little more, but it'll probably just stretch back out. Yeah, see, it's just how it is.
And then do you also, like when you put snap rings on, you make sure it spins so that just confirms that you're in the slot?
No, I just like to go side to side with it. I just like to see how tight it is. I mean, ideally there would be no side to side play in it at all, but there usually is, unless you're going to replace every single snap ring. I can tell by the amount of force that I had to put on the snap ring pliers. When you go to put that on, a lot of times your snap ring pliers are hanging down below the snap ring, you know, like that. So when you go to put it on, it goes in back here, but it's not in right there. So you hear that snap as it jumps into the groove. We know that's still a good snap ring. It's not going to come out. That's it for the counter shaft for now. The next thing we're going to do is the input shaft. We've sandblasted this. A lot of it's just for aesthetics, but really nice to inspect the tip here at the pilot bearing. We can look at all the splines, make sure everything's nice and clean. There's no hang-ups or any issues down there. Also, your front seal's right there, so we want to take a good look at that. And if you notice, we sandblasted down, but we did not sandblast the seal surface. We simply put a rag around it like that and sandblast from there up, just so we don't get any glass bead or anything on this. One of the things that I'm gonna do is grab a Scotch-Brite, and I'm just gonna clean up this surface right here. Totally don't have to, but I like to do it. Looks pretty good. Do a little bit more on that seal surface. That'll take a seal, that'll take a bearing. Now I'm gonna inspect the gear itself. You see how there's that nice shine, that wear pattern right there? That shine is just a good gear finish. It's not been burnt, it hasn't had metal run through it, and they all look like that. And you can only see one side of the gear, so I'll do the same thing and just turn it over and look at the other side. I see little stuff right there, but it comes off. So we'll do a quick clean on that and call it good. So we've got the gear cleaned. Now we're going to install the input bearing. Obviously, snap ring groove goes up, sits on there just like that. We're going to use one of these boxes. Simply put that in there like that, and then we're going to grab one of these plates, set it on top of that, and here we go. Another thing we're going to look at on the input shaft is inside of here where the pocket bearing rides. Just going to feel it, make sure there's nothing funky in there, nice and clean.
Again, cleaning up the snap ring. Better than new.
Stuck the snap ring in the groove so we know it fits and the bearing's all the way down. Input shaft is done for now. Now we're going to inspect the main shaft. So we have a bearing that rides here, so that's an important surface. A hub presses onto these splines, so we want to look at those splines and make sure nothing's out of line. A bearing also rides here, so again we're going to inspect that as a bearing surface. Same here. And then these are thrust surfaces, so we're going to look at those, make sure there's no chatter marks. These look pretty good. We're back to splines. Splines look good. A bearing also rides here. It's a two-piece bearing. It's this guy right here, so that's why you see that line in the middle. A bearing presses on here, so you notice that looks a little ugly, but it doesn't matter. That's just a bearing pressing on there. And then fifth gear presses on here. This connects to the transfer case. Another bearing presses on here. All those surfaces look pretty good. I would say we can reuse this shaft. This is all parts that we're going to use, either get installed in the case or when we're putting the cases together. So just to keep the workbench with as few items as possible, we're going to put all this stuff together and set it to the side. So before we build the main shaft, we're just going to organize some of these pieces just so we can explain what they are and the order, try to make it a little easier for you guys. So we've already separated out of our small parts, synchro keys, detents, and interlocks, and plugs and springs and whatnot. And then we have all of our snap rings in here. We're gonna put our reverse gears together. That's our reverse idler and shaft and arm. The pivot bracket for the arm. It's our center plate bearing retainer. 2 of our thrust washers. All of our gear idler bearings. And our forks.
At a glance, this is what the parts look like. You have first gear right here, it's the biggest gear. Stepping down in size, you have second gear. Stepping down again, you have third gear. Fourth gear is on the input shaft here. It's right there. You have fifth gear assembly right here. And then you have the reverse gear. This is just a quick look at how the gears look in comparison with each other. This is the counter shaft, and the main shaft is right here. It's already in the box here.
Okay, let's assemble the main shaft. Assembly lube. You can use oil, whatever you want. We added assembly lube to the thrust surface and the bearing surface. Set the bearing on there. Now we're gonna grab third gear. Wipe it out. Look at the synchro surface. It looks really nice. If it doesn't, we'd take a little bit of Scotch-Brite to it. I'm pretty happy with that gear. Assembly lube, there's a thrust surface on the gear also that we looked at. I'm gonna add some assembly lube to that. Set that gear on there. There we go. There's our snap ring. There's our 3/4 hub. In this transmission, there's only 2 of these really lightweight snap rings. They're both the same. We're gonna grab one of them. We're gonna install it in here. And you notice there's only a thrust surface on one side of this hub. See, that looks a lot different. You can still see where the snap ring was. The other snap ring goes here, but we'll put that on way later. For now, we're gonna put it on this side with the thrust surface. Just gonna install that in there like that. And that snap ring needs to end up just like that, where it barely goes past one notch all the way around to the other notch. Once we've got that done, gonna add a little bit of assembly lube on the thrust surface. Okay, so we've got our hub, the snap ring installed, a little bit of assembly lube. Now we're gonna install the third gear synchro ring. It fits real nice. Now we're gonna install the 3/4 hub. The synchro ring can be in any position at this point. The hub pressed on there. We've chosen this random piece of pipe here. It's a brass bushing. We're doing that because we don't want to press on the gear. We want to press on this thrust surface here because we're going to press this down. That in there nice and square. We're going to use one of these cups to press that into place. And before we do that, we're going to make sure that that cup fits over the spline so it doesn't interfere. And with pressure on the press, I'm gonna spin that gear just to make sure everything's nice. Now we're gonna install the snap ring. I'm gonna tighten the ring up just a little bit. It's in there pretty nice. So that's it for that side of the shaft. Now we're gonna flip it over and go the other way. Same deal with the assembly lube down onto the thrust surface and the bearing surface. Inspect the gear. I don't really care for these lines. It's fine, but I'd rather they weren't there. A little bit of Scotch-Brite on that surface. That's a lot better. Install the needle roller bearing and then second gear. Spread the assembly lube around in there a little bit on the thrust surfaces. Now we're gonna put on the second gear synchro, which is a synchro set. It's 3 pieces, has the little tabs that drop into here, And then it has these notches that fit into those recesses on the hub. We need to get it oriented correctly. Just like that. Flip it over. Sits just like that. And if you look, these notches fit in here, and these tabs fit in these notches. These tabs need to be centered or close between those. So R150s are notorious for popping out of first gear. That comes from wear on this part of the constant run gear, as well as wear on the inside of the collar. Also reverses on the back side of this collar, and you can see on this one, it gets kind of chewed up. So we decided to start with a nice fresh new gear and collar. So now we're going to install the 1-2 hub. Again, those notches down. Before we do it, let's clean up that surface a little bit. That's a lot better. Yeah, you can see the difference. This side's flat and this side has the notches. Those notches are for these tabs, and these tabs sit in these notches. Okay, we're pretty dang close. We'll get the rest of it in the press. Since you can't see inside that gear, inside that hub, and we know we need those tabs to sit in there, we want to set that synchro assembly just like that, where it's down flat against the hub. We can see these to make sure these notches line up when we press this all together. So here we go.
So you just want to press slowly so you're able to line that up correctly, right?
Yep. So we're checking this synchro. It's new, so we don't really have a whole lot of risk of it being warped or worn, but the correct way to check a synchro is to install it on the forcing cone. This is the forcing cone of the gear. We're going to install it on the forcing cone. No pressure at all. It should spin nice and free and maintain that nice gap right there. With a very slight bit of pressure inward, it should grab. And it does. One more thing with the synchro too, to check it for square, you just install it onto the forcing cone and just see, does it rock in any direction? It doesn't. It sits pretty nice. It's got a nice uniform gap all the way around it. No signs that it's warped or egg-shaped. Just a good fit. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do is put this 1-2 collar on. If you remember in the teardown video, we marked the forward direction of that, which is this edge right here. This is the front of the shaft, the back of the shaft. So this collar installs like that with the groove facing down. So to do that, if you notice inside of here, you have 3 spots where there's 2 missing teeth, one on either side of this key notch. It's in 3 different spots. This center spline right here lines up perfect with this, and you can see how there's missing splines here. When you install that, you're gonna line it up.
Because there's 3 places, 1, 2, 3, right?
Yeah, and they're all equally spaced apart, so there's no real clocking.
There's no order, it's just they need to fit in those spaces.
So now to install this, if you look, we need to come in and push in on these. And we
Little
can,
fingers?
yeah, we can start working it down.
So in a perfect world, if you could get all 3 of those tabs pushed in at the same time, then it would slide in. But you're actually doing them a little bit individually to where
just kind of worked it down a little bit. These are a little tricky because they're a little narrower than normal, so it's hard to really push in with your finger all the way. Now we're going to install our snap ring, which we already checked, we know it fits, and then our plastic bearing spacer. To install this, I put it in like that with it centered between the keys, and I use a big flat screwdriver and I just twist it into place and then give it a tap. Then our plastic spacer. This plastic spacer sits in there to keep that bearing from riding on that snap ring. the synchro ring in there, lining up these notches.
So you see the tab on the synchro drops right in there into that notch. And there's 3 of them, right?
Yep. And they're all equally spaced, so the orientation doesn't matter as long as the tabs are in the notch. So we've got our gear looped up. We're going to install the new first gear. Simply drop it down, spread that around.
So first gear isn't a press fit.
No, none of the gears are a press.
None of
the
the
only
gear-
thing that presses on is the hub. You'll notice on this little retainer pin, one side is totally flat and the other side has a little dome to it. The dome portion of that pin is going to get installed in that hole right there on the main shaft, right behind first gear. Just like that.
The flat side is facing outboard.
Flat side, outboard,
Yeah,
domed inboard.
right. Okay, so now I'm going to clean up this.
Thrust washer.
Yeah. Really only need to clean one side. I just like to see which side's better. I'm going to use this side against the gear. I just like it a little better. Realistically, it doesn't matter. I'm going to slide that over and we're going to line up that notch. See how that little pin is retaining that thrust washer? Next thing we're going to do is install the main shaft center plate bearing with the groove up. So to do that, we're going to go back to our caveman roots. Same deal. We don't have anything that we can really press on with the exception of the tip of the shaft. And I think it would be pretty sketchy to put that in a press and have all this weight just sitting on that. I wouldn't really be comfortable with that. So I prefer to just use the hammer and a piece of pipe. And before we go all the way home, we're gonna make sure that thrust washer hasn't moved, and it hasn't. And that's that. So the next thing that we're gonna do is install 5th gear. We've already inspected it. There's no chips in the teeth. It looks good. The internal splines are good. We're gonna install that gear and you'll notice there's a step on one side and it's flat on the other. The step goes down. So same deal. We're gonna drive that onto the shaft just like that. The next thing we're gonna do is install the center plate onto the main shaft. You'll notice there's 2 different sides to the center plate, obviously. The recessed side is gonna go down, just like that. We've got this sitting on the hub. Those hubs are pretty fragile, so we're gonna be careful, but we're just gonna gently tap this plate down. It didn't take much force at all. Now we're gonna put our snap ring on there. Just like that. Notice there's a gap between the snap ring and the plate. There won't be when it's all done. It pulls up, but you'll see it go back and forth. So now we're gonna take this out. I'm gonna flip it over. And now we're gonna build this piece. So first thing is our other little lightweight synchro snap ring. Install that in there, making sure the tips come just past those notches.
Oh, just past those notches.
Mm-hmm. Now when you get to this point, we have 2 collars that are basically the same size. You'll notice they're different inside. See how this one has the 2 missing splines over here and then there are 5 in the middle? This one's not like that. This looks a lot like the last one we put on with just the 2 and the 1 spline. This is the 3/4 collar. The way to tell them apart is just how the splines are set up inside. The 3/4 collar has this set up and the 5th collar has this set up. With the missing splines, 5 splines in the middle. And we've already marked this for forward. We got our little dot. You can use a file, whatever you want, just something so you know that goes forward. But if you didn't mark it, you see there's a step. The step goes forward. This has a knocked off edge and this has a step. The step goes forward.
And so up is forward?
Yeah, this is up right here. This is the front of the transmission.
Okay.
The step goes up or forward. We're gonna set it down right side up. Gonna grab our 3 synchro keys. Now we're gonna look at this. If you zoom in, you'll see that notch
Yeah.
right there. So when we put these keys in, we have to have that notch lined up. A lot of people struggle with this. It's really not hard, but here's the magic of it.
Can you show the orientation? Because there's two sides to that.
Okay, yeah. So this is the outside.
With that little protrusion.
Yeah, the protrusion is the outside. The little notch is on the inside.
Okay.
Just like that, you can see it.
Okay.
So a lot of guys struggle with this because you're doing a lot of things at one time, but this is the way to do it. Have the shaft just like this, where you have two on whatever side you're comfortable with. But for me, two on my left side, one on my right side. And I have my collar right here already facing the correct direction. I put one in, hold it with my thumb. I'm gonna put the other one in, hold it with my index finger, and with the other synchro in my hand, I'm gonna grab the collar and put it up there and get it close to oriented correctly. And then I'm gonna put the other key in, and I'm gonna use these two fingers to line up the hub. When you're putting these keys in the collar on, you have to make sure that the key on the bottom side is going into the notch. You have the synchro ring right there, and it needs that recess to go in for the collar to slide down. And it's pretty easy for it to turn and get out of alignment, and you'll never get that collar on there. So now we're gonna put the input shaft pocket bearing on the end of this shaft, and the synchro and the input shaft. So we want some lube there. Drop our bearing on. I'm gonna lube inside of the input shaft. Set our synchro ring in place. And install the input shaft just like that. So now we're gonna take this whole thing out. Real carefully set it down like that. Now we're gonna install the counter shaft. We're just gonna clean up our bearing surface a little bit, get some grease on it. We have our bearing here ready to install. Okay, so now we're gonna install the counter shaft. We've greased up the bearing surface. We're just gonna slide it through the hole. And we're gonna set it down where it goes, which is just like that. Now we're gonna take our rear bearing and simply slide it into place. You'll notice that this snap ring comes already installed on this bearing, at least if you're getting the kit from us, and that bearing just pushes in until that snap ring sits up against the center plate, and that's it. The counter shaft is installed. Okay, so the next thing that we're gonna do is install the reverse gear, the rear bearing retainer with these bolts, a little bit of Loctite. I use blue, you could use red or none, or so we're gonna put a little bit of assembly lube inside of the reverse gear. This is the shaft. You'll notice this notch, which is gonna end up being captured by this plate, so that it all has to go in. This gear faces this direction with the cutout towards the center plate. The notch, the shaft is gonna go through there like that. It's gonna install just like that. So now we're going to install the center plate. You need to look at this for wear. They usually are not worn, but sometimes they are. You'll notice that there's 3 levels here. You have this upper level that sits up against the center plate. Then the next step down is the snap ring on the bearing. And then the final and third step pushes on the face of the bearing. And that's what keeps that shaft from moving back and forth in the center plate. It's possible for that to wear. It's usually very obvious when it's worn. It'll look eaten up. You can measure it if you want. So now we're gonna install this onto here, and we're gonna turn that shaft and get that plate into that notch. See that, how the bolt holes line up, and that plate is up in the notch of that reverse idler shaft. And now we'll install our bolts with a little bit of Loctite. I don't believe those bolts had Loctite on them from the factory, but it doesn't hurt.
I'm guessing the torque value.
We're gonna torque them to that much. So that's that. The next thing that we're gonna do is grab another one of those. It's the same exact one that we put on the back side of first gear. Still has the little dome and the flat spot. Put a tiny bit of grease in that hole just to retain the pin. And then we're gonna push that pin in place.
We installed another one of these style pins right behind first gear, and this is the second and last one of this style that goes into the transmission.
The next thing that we're going to install is the 5th gear thrust washer. You'll notice it has 2 notches in it. If you look on the other side, you can only see one of them. So the one that goes all the way through is going to line up with that pin. I don't know if you want to see that again, but that notch doesn't go all the way through and one does. And there's a tapered side and a flat side. So this is the correct way to install it, with the tapered side in and the notch that goes all the way through lining up with that retainer pin. The late R150 fifth gear synchros are kind of tricky. We have all these pieces. This is called the pull. This is the cone. This is the synchro. And I don't remember what this is called, but we need it. This is the way it goes. If you notice in the cone, there's these notches. There's 3 of them. In the pull, there's these 3 tabs, and they protrude out from the face of the pull. So to get this together, we're gonna line up those tabs with the notches, and that's gonna go through there just like that. There, you can see it a little better there. The tabs lining up with the notches. So now we're gonna put it in the synchro. There's really nothing special there, except you gotta turn the tabs on the pull to where they're directly centered between the deals that hang down on the synchro. And that's because in this frame, these are gonna line up in there like that, but at the same time, these tabs have to go through these notches. So just like that. Now when it's all done, you flip it over and you have to rotate the pull until they're centered, just like that. And at that point, this assembly is stuck together. Then you're going to install it onto 5th gear, and in 5th gear we'll notice these big notches and then the smaller notches. The bigger notches for that, the smaller notches for the synchro pull. Fits together just like that. We've put our 5th gear synchro assembly on the gear. Everything's good there. We have our split needle roller bearing. It's going to go on here. This is the oil hole for this bearing. That's oil coming in from the little plastic 5th gear oiler cup in the rear case and out through that hole to oil this bearing. Assembly lube. Not sponsored by Joe Gibbs, but they make great stuff. Fifth gear plate, little tabs are gonna come through these holes. Those are the 2 8x125 threaded holes for the puller. These are the holes for the synchro pull. So simply goes on there.
A light press fit, or?
Yeah. So we're gonna stop right before we get all the way there and make sure we're still lined up. That seems kind of barbaric to do it that way, but I don't know what else you're gonna do. It's not like you can press it. You're gonna put that whole thing in the press.
I like the hammer technique.
This one we're just gonna make sure it fits before we get all crazy with it. And we're just gonna install it with some channel locks. So now we're gonna install this extra special coupler sleeve. You have to be very careful when you put it on. It goes on like that.
It doesn't matter which way you put it on.
Well, yeah, you can't put it on that way.
We tried.
You have to put it on that way.
Perfect. Okay.
So now we're going to put on our rear main shaft output bearing. It's going to go on there. So we're going to find a cup that will drive that on nice and clean. I think that's going to be a winner.
When you're driving these bearings on with a piece of pipe or whatever, you're putting the force against the inner race.
Oh yes, absolutely. I would never drive out here. Always the inner race. Just a quick check, like this is our snap ring groove right here. So this is the snap ring that's gonna go on there. So before you do this, you can check and make sure that your depths are correct, and here they are. And then when I pick a cup to put this on with, it's just a steel cup. I'm making sure it goes over the shaft and making sure it goes past the snap ring groove. That way I know I can drive that bearing home.
Making the snap ring new again.
Making it great again.
All right.
Same deal with the, there you go. You got a good look in there. It's all the way, it's in the groove.
Groovy.
Groovy. Now we're gonna put on our 5th gear collar. So we have our dot indicating forward. So this is a really wide assembly here. So this wide spline and that wide spline line up with those, and it's the same 3 times. So there you go. It's a little easier to see if you put this collar on before you put this the rear plate on, but it does work. It's just a little difficult, but I just made a mark on the center of the two wide grooves which line up with these two, and then you can come in here and you can see it, and then you just push in on these tabs. Gotta push all three of them at once. It goes on.
What is this piece?
This is the pivot arm for the reverse gear. Again, a little bit of blue Loctite. That piece sits right in there like that.
So you would only be removing this pivot arm if you just wanted to clean up the... So like Nick said in part one, you would only be removing that pivot arm if you wanted to be able to get in there and clean a little better. So most likely you're not going to be dealing with that.
We're going to install our magnet. Goes right here, just like this. It just slides in place, just like that. So now we're going to install the reverse arm. Remember, we don't want to line that up. I like to rotate it all the way over and pull that almost all the way out. Going to kind of hold it like this. This fork is going to end up in that groove. This notch is going to end up around that, and then this shaft is going to go through that first hole. So you just got to kind of thread it in there. We'll roll it over like this so you can see it a little better. So this is the hole where the lock ball goes. That lock ball that's going to go all the way down through the top bore hole. So we're going to rotate that in line with that and push that in until that shaft is just barely sticking through the back side of the plate like that. Now we're gonna stand it up on end. I just moved reverse back, and you can look down through that hole and you can see that there's a notch down in there. Oh yeah. Okay, so now we have one of the 9.5mm pills and ball. Ball drops down in there. Pill's gonna go on a magnet all the way down, and we have to move this a little bit until that, you got that, how I made that pill go all the way down in the hole.
Yeah.
And now we're just gonna stick our handy dandy Kershaw knife.
So it detaches the ball from the magnet.
Yeah, otherwise you're just gonna take it back out with you.
Yeah.
Now we're gonna assemble the forks and rails. So first thing, we're gonna grease.
What shift fork is that for?
This
What
is
gear?
fifth gear.
Fifth gear, okay.
And this is the fifth gear rail. You can see the hole for the roll pin, the lengths match. We have the notches here for the detent. We got the groove for the stopper. And then we have this notch here. Remember the ball that we dropped down in the reverse arm?
Yep.
That ball is gonna come up into that notch. So we're gonna put that through. So now, does our roll pin hole line up? Look, it does line up. So now we can see our roll pin hole lines up, and we have our 3 notches that look just like these. You can kind of see them back there. They're facing out for the detent ball.
Where the detent ball is going to interface with it.
Correct. So we know that that rail is installed correctly. It's in the right spot and it's not flipped 180 degrees. We're putting in the roll pin that holds the fifth gear fork to the rail. This roll pin is the longer of the 2 roll pins. We just messed with the reverse gear a little bit and with the 5th rail until we gained access to that snap ring groove right there.
So that was the groove that he was trying to get in position to where he can get the C-clip in.
Now we're gonna real carefully roll that thing over. This one, the way I get it in is just get it started right there, and then I put a flat screwdriver between first gear and just push it into it and just lightly pry against first gear to snap that in. You can use pliers, but this deal for the reverse arm sticking out and the gear right there, it's just really awkward to get anything in there. So rolling it into the gear and prying it back with the flat screwdriver is a pretty good way. Another one of the pills. Drop that through the hole all the way down into that spot and take the magnet off. So now get our 1-2 fork going. Got our dot facing forward. It's gonna go on there like that.
That's the shift fork for first and second gear?
Yep, and here's the shift fork for third and fourth. Same deal. Got our dot forward, dot forward. We got these two rails. We know we gotta finish making our pocket here, so it's gotta be this lower rail is gonna go in next. And that ball in there is not letting us, oh, there it just dropped into place and it's letting us go through. So now we have this through hole right here. If you remember from the disassembly video, there's the little tiny pill. So to get it to stay in place, we're just gonna put a little bit of grease right there. Push that pill into the grease and it'll stay there.
Is that thing directional?
No, so we'll slide that back just a little bit. We'll go till right there. And now, just to make sure that we're doing it right, look, our bolt hole lines up. We got our notches facing out for the detent. We're looking good. So the next thing we're gonna do is put another clip right in that groove. Now that's in place, we got our snap ring. So all three of these pills are all the same. So right back down in there again. Slide the rail in. Now this rail is going to go through the hole in the 1-2 fork and into the 3-4 fork. And right about the time this all lines up, our bolt hole ought to be lined up, and it is. Perfect. Now that we've done that, we can rotate it over, grab our 2 bolts. Last clip on the last rail, just snap it into place. We got 3 springs, they're all the same. We have 3 balls, same deal. No ball and spring in the lower hole. That's just the lock for this. So the middle hole, the top hole, both get a ball and a spring. The other one goes on the top. We'll do that in just a minute. Just want to see a magic trick? You got these old greasy plugs. Whoa! It's amazing. 6mm Allen and some thread sealant. I'm sure you could use silicone here, or you could probably use nothing.
Is that like pipe dope?
Yeah.
$24 karat gold.
Yeah, 24 karat gold, zinc plated.
Tighten those to that much.
Ball, spring,
cap with some pipe dope.
send it home.
We're running out of parts.
Okay, now that we have the transmission assembled, we're gonna run through the gears real quick and make sure everything feels good. First thing we'll do is reverse. That felt really nice. There's 5th gear. Again, that felt pretty good. Back to neutral. 1st gear, pretty good. Second gear. When you're doing this, you have to remember that these shafts out here will be supported by the case, so they're always a little funky when the cases are not on them, so sometimes they don't feel perfect, but it needs to work good. 4th gear, 3rd gear, And now just to check the function of the interlocks, with it in any gear, you can check. It should not be able to go into any other gear. None of the other forks, they should all be locked. Nothing can move. That'll prevent you from going into 2 gears at one time. Nothing good will happen if you do that.
You won't go faster when you're in 2 gears?
You might.
You might go slower too.
You might go slower. It's like dual cases. This thing here is the deal that gets trapped by the reverse lockout mechanism that's in the case. That's the piece that prevents you from going from fifth to reverse. You have to come out of fifth, back to neutral, and then you can go into reverse. You can't go straight from fifth to reverse. So this thing likes to hang up when you're putting the cases on. So I found that the best way to do it is to push that fork forward. It helps for a few reasons. One is it kind of traps that in there better rather than being in that big old void. It kind of traps it in better. And it also gets this away from the reverse lockout.
So you put the lower shift fork into second gear.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now we're gonna set this off to the side. We're all used to installing a seal like that, right? The face of the seal. But here you're looking at the back of the seal, so that seal goes like that.
What is this thing called?
Bearing retainer and seal housing. So, and that's really all we have to do other than wipe the surface clean with some acetone. We'll do that right before we install it. This is the reverse lockout. So it goes in that hole. About like that, with that finger sticking out towards that hole. And the roll pins gets installed right down through that hole.
Oh, through the threaded hole there?
So we're gonna install, this is the shorter of the 2 roll pins, right down through that hole. Until it's flush with the bottom. Now we're gonna install the rear seal face up or out.
This is the seal that interfaces with the input shaft of the transfer case.
I'm gonna use some acetone and a clean rag. This surface doesn't really matter. We'll just give it a quick wipe down, get any extra paint off of it.
There's no oil in the cavity between the transmission and the transfer case.
Correct.
Unless
Until
you
you do a gear drive swap.
Unless you do dual cases, right?
Yep. So same deal. Just get this nice and clean.
But that side is going to be a sealing surface, correct?
Yeah. I just like to wipe that other side down. I like to do it first so I can leave this side face up. A couple more things. Yeah, we're going to install a new breather. That breather goes right here in that hole, and a 14mm socket does a pretty good job. You don't want to pound on the cap, so that 14mm socket is catching that flange. Now, one last thing before we're done with the rear case. We're gonna put in the 5th gear oiler. This is a new one, and it's just gonna snap in place just like that. So that's it for the rear case section. So now we're gonna set up the front case, which really just consists of wiping it down and getting a little bit of assembly lube installed. So
Don't scuff my paint, bro.
I'm trying not to, man. Bam. That's clean. Now we're gonna get a little bit of assembly grease just to make it go together better in the reverse idler loop, and then
All those shift rod holes?
yeah, and you'll notice that there's a bushing in 3 of them. And there's only 3 rods sticking out of this transmission.
Oh.
But this case is just the leftover mold from the earlier version where there was 4. So don't really need it in there, but I just did it on accident. So
Okay. Well, you see a hole and you want to put something in. Man, I get it.
yeah, you see the struggle. Okay, I gotta go get some FIPG. So here we go, Toyota 1281, the new blend.
The pink blend.
The pink sauce. The E is the pink stuff. And they changed it now. Used to not have to pop the cherry.
Still have to cut the tip.
Yeah.
Give it a circumcision.
Yeah.
This sealant is for transmissions, transfer cases, differentials. The black 103 is for the engines, and that's for engine oil applications.
And this is the same as the orange stuff. Back in the day, it was orange. Not even that long ago, like 3 weeks ago, it was orange. Now it's pink. But you know, I actually like the pink stuff better. I'm not a cake maker, so don't judge. Do my best.
Just drop that bead, bro.
Like you make like a Cheerio around it.
Boom. Boom. Okay, remember earlier when we talked about there not being a thrust surface on one side of the 3-4 hub? The reason for that is because when the cases are on, the input shaft is held out in the correct spot by the snap ring and the bearing retainer. When it's on the bench like this and obviously no cases on it, it's possible for the input shaft to get shoved in and the fourth gear synchro to get stuck on the shaft, which is what we have here. You can kind of see that all the other synchros are a little bit loose. That's what you want. And they're all like that. None of these got stuck because there's a thrust surface, so the gears can't get too close together, but that's not the case here. You can see here that everything's in neutral, so the input shaft and output shaft shouldn't be connected. If you look right here, you can see we're in neutral. We're not in fifth gear. We're not in first or second, third or fourth, but yet the input shaft and output shaft are stuck together. This should spin freely and it doesn't. That's because that synchro's stuck on that forcing cone. So we need to get that to pop loose before we assemble the cases. Sometimes you can just stick a small screwdriver or something in there and work it back. Here, that's not the case. It's pretty stuck. So I'm gonna very carefully, using a really small punch, I'm gonna get in here and I'm gonna find somewhere, a good spot where I'm not on one of these teeth. I'm gonna go right there. Just a little tap. We're not damaging the synchro. Just that little tap. Now with that synchro free, you can see that the input shaft and output shaft are not connected. See how that's not turning? That's what we want. Sideways like that, it'll actually stand up on the bench. Get Sean's oily fingerprints off of the thing. And here we go. It's kind of goofy through that. You gotta kind of thread that thing around that and then turn it sideways. Just like that. Set it down. See how tight that got already without hitting it, no bolts, no nothing. We're not gonna put the bearing retainer on, but we definitely gotta get the snap rings on. This, you can always pull that back out, but we need access to push that counter shaft back out. And once we put the rear case on, we'll lose that access. So, big snap ring on, little snap ring on. Bring this all the way to the edge of the bench. Make sure that forks forward. Put that in it. I like to get a little bit of assembly lube in those two holes. And just a little smear right there to, just since they're sandblasted, that bearing sometimes will hang up in that pocket. So we just finished putting the FIPG on the extension housing or the rear case piece. We've put our shift rod in. We have the lower rail shifted forward to trap it and keep it from interfering with the reverse lockout. We have our shift shoe and bolt ready to go. And that's it, here we go. So we're gonna go just a little bit. We gotta stop and get this guy on. Bolt forward, it goes in just like that. And we could finish putting it together. See, that thing's already messing with this. There, it went together real nice. So now the first thing that we're gonna do, a whole handful of brand new bolts. We're gonna put 2 of them in. Just 2 bolts in case we have to take it back apart. A little bit of Loctite on that guy. Now we're gonna run through the gears and make sure everything's okay. Oh. And here's the test. We should not be able to go, that's fifth, won't give us reverse. So we know that the reverse lockout's installed correctly. Back to neutral, and then there's reverse. That's the way it's supposed to go. And then we're gonna leave it in reverse. Gonna install the rest of the bolts. That's where the roll pin went for the reverse lockout.
So one more plug right there.
Yep. Now we're going to install the plungers. One on each side. That was a 24 millimeter.
And what are the plungers responsible for?
With the transmission in neutral, they just provide a little bit of tension side to side. So without them, if you push the shoe over, it might just stay there. So with those, they just keep the shift shoe returning to center.
Oh, so that's what you're feeling when you're jiggling it back and forth to find neutral.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Now we're gonna stand this bad boy up.
There's a light at the end of the tunnel.
So now we got our FIPG on the bearing retainer. These are through bolts, they go into oil, so we're ready to go to put a little bit of silicone on the tip of the bolt. We're gonna apply a little bit of assembly lube right there above the snap ring at the base of that input shaft. That's where the front seal seals to. So we wanna do that. And we're making sure both of our snap rings are fully seated down. Everything's good. And we're gonna put the nose cone right over the top. Push that in place. Start grabbing our bolts.
How likely is gear oil to come through those threads if you didn't put FIPG on them?
It wouldn't be much.
Yeah, it would just maybe seep just a little bit.
Yep. Now that we've got that done, we're gonna put in our 2 transmission to bell housing dowel pins. One goes in that hole. Just like that. The other one goes right here. Just like that. Next thing, we're gonna install our fill and drain plugs. Magnetic drain plug. Drain plug goes right here on the lower side. And then you have to look, there's a hole on both sides of the transmission. If you look through there, you see that finger in there?
Yeah.
So that's for the reverse indicator. The other side is the fill plug. So we'll install the fill plug just tight enough that it doesn't fall out. No need to really tighten it.
So fill plug goes on passenger side then, right?
Yes. All Toyota transmissions have a 8-digit date code right here on the bottom, and the last 5 is a serial number. The first 3 is the date code, and Toyota does it really weird. They didn't help us out much, but like this one is 811 is the first 3. So we know that this transmission, the R150F 3.4, was only made from 95 to 04. So the 8 is gonna be 1998. We know it can't be 88 because they didn't make this, and it can't be 2008, so it's 1998, and the 11 is 11th month. So 811. This transmission was produced the 11th month of 1998. That's a easy way to date code these transmissions, and it'll really help you order parts for them.
All right, we are all done with rebuilding this R150F manual transmission. I said we, but it was actually all Nick. I'd like to thank Nick for sharing all this good tech with you, the do-it-yourself automotive technician. I think it's pretty damn cool he's sharing this so you can rebuild it if you want to. But after watching this, if you think that no way do I want to rebuild this manual transmission on my rig, well, you now know who is an expert at doing this. So call Yota1 Performance and make your order for a rebuilt transmission. So remember, if you're going to be doing the rebuild yourself, Yota1 Performance has all the parts you would need to do it, and they have very good pricing. So I would highly suggest giving them a call and ordering the parts you need for the rebuild of your manual transmission. In case you're not really familiar with our channel and you don't know all the things Yota1 Performance does, they are a leader in the industry of rebuilding Toyota engines. And we've installed 3 of their engines in videos that we've done on our channel. They also have a full shop with full-time mechanics doing anything and everything you can imagine on these vehicles. Suspension work, engine work, whatever you need, they can do it here. If you're in the Riverbank area, which is really close to the town of Modesto, or you're willing to drive here, then I highly recommend Yota1 Performance as a shop you can trust to do the work for you. They do high quality work. They have a great reputation, and they have a lot of integrity, and there it is there. You can trust them with your Toyota. So in closing, I really want to thank Nick for doing this, and Rebecca, his partner in crime that run this business. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed yet, click on that subscribe button, and also click on that notification bell if you'd like to be notified when we put up new content on our channel. Peace out, happy wrenching, sick mods, and sick manual transmission rebuilds by Yota1 Performance. Yeah. Yota1.
Now the problem is you're not going to want to put it in the truck.
Right in the middle of where
Dude,
you're
if you
walking.
put like a lampshade on it, maybe she'll let you leave it.
Ah. And then we can maybe hook this up to a gear and just like, it could be like a turning lampshade and the light can, it's like
Disco
a
ball.
Disco.
Disco ball.